Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when we sit down to do one of these, we are zooming in. We're looking at a specific piece of tech or a weird historical event or maybe a trend in psychology. We take a microscope to something small.
Right. We usually deal in the specific, the granular.
But today is different. Today we are zooming out, way out. We are looking at, well, the operating system of the modern world.
It really is the operating system, isn't it? I mean, it runs in the background of almost every decision we make, every building we see, every job we take, and every meal we eat. It's the invisible water we are all swimming in.
Exactly. We are diving into the history and philosophy of capitalism. Now, I know you're thinking, oh no, economics, graphs, supply and demand curves, boredom. But let me assure you, the source material we have today is wild. It is absolutely not a textbook.
Not even close. No, this is a story.
We're talking about pirates. We're talking about drug dealers starting wars. We're talking about imaginary bakeries in El Dorado. It paints a picture of the economy that is, well, it's surprising and, frankly, a little bit terrifying in parts.
It is surprising. And to set the stage, I think we have to start with the metaphor the author uses right at the beginning, because it completely changed how I picture the global market. I used to think of the economy as this, I don't know, this stoic, stable machine, like a steam engine.
Oh, I loved this. The source describes the modern economy not as a machine, but as a hormone-soused teenager.
Which is such a vivid image. It's perfect.
It's perfect. It says the economy is this awkward growing beast that eats everything it can find and grows faster than you can count. It's hungry, it's constantly expanding, and it doesn't really know when to stop.
And that hunger, that constant expansion, leads us to the central mystery of this entire deep dive.
The mystery of the explosion.
Right, because if you look at history, for thousands and thousands of years, the economy was basically flat, a flat line.
Let's unpack this with some numbers because they are just staggering. And I want you to really visualize this. If we go back to the year 1500, so we are talking the time of Columbus, the Renaissance, kings and castles, total global production was about $250 billion.
And that's adjusted for today's value, of course. That is the sum total of all the wheat, all the swords, all the clothes, all the houses produced by every single human on Earth in a year.
250 billion.
Okay.
Now, fast forward to today, what's the number?
It hovers around $60 trillion.
60 trillion. That is a jump that is hard to even wrap your head around. It's not double. It's not triple. It's a completely different order of magnitude. 240 times bigger.
And per person, it's just as crazy. In 1500, the average person produced about $550 worth of value a year, basically just enough to stay alive. Today, it's nearly $9,000. For most of human history, the economy stayed the same size. Then suddenly, boom, it explodes.
And that's the mission of this deep dive. We need to figure out what happened. What was the spark? We're looking at Chapter 16 of our source material, The Capitalist Creed. And it argues that this explosion comes down to one single word.
Growth.
Growth. But growth is just the result. To understand how we actually achieve it, how we went from 250 billion to 60 trillion, we have to understand the mechanism behind it. And that mechanism is something that sounds more like a feeling than an economic term. It's trust.
Trust. It sounds so soft, doesn't it? So uneconomic.
Yeah.
We think of capitalism as cutthroat, cold, rational. But as we get into this, I think we're going to see that money is basically just crystallized trust. Without trust, the whole thing evaporates.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to take a journey from an imaginary bakery in El Dorado
To the stock markets of Amsterdam.
and eventually to the slave ships of the Atlantic and the rubber plantations of the Congo. It's going to be a ride. You ready to get in the magic tricks?
Let's do it.
Okay, Section 1, the magic of money creation. This was the part of the source material where I literally had to put the paper down and just stare at the wall for a second. It's the aha moment regarding where money actually comes from.
This is the bakery experiment. It's a classic thought experiment to explain fractional reserve banking, but the way it's framed here makes it so clear. It really exposes the magic of the system.
So let's create a theater of the mind here for everyone listening. I want you to imagine a town. Let's call it El Dorado. And we have three characters. First, we have Samuel Greedy, great name, by the way, who is a financier. He's just opened a brand new bank in town.
Okay, Mr. Greedy at the bank, got it.
Then we have A.A. Stone. He's a contractor. Big, burly guy, builds things. And finally, we have Jane McDonough. She's a chef.
And the scenario starts simply enough. A.A. Stone, the contractor, he finishes a big job. Maybe he built a mansion for a lord or something. He gets paid $1 million in cash.
Okay, $1 million cash. Let's picture gold coins, right? Heavy, real. You can drop them on your foot.
He takes that cash, lugs it in a big sack, and he walks into Mr. Greedy's brand new bank. He deposits it. So currently the bank has $1 million in its vaults. That's the capital. Stone has a slip of paper, a receipt saying he has $1 million. Everyone is happy.
Right. Simple so far. Enter Jane McDonut.
Yeah.
She's a great chef, but she's broke. She has no money. But she sees an opportunity. There's no good bakery in her part of town. She has a dream. She wants to build a state-of-the-art bakery, but she needs money for ovens, sinks, the building itself.
So she goes to the only place in town with money, the bank. She sits down across from Mr. Greedy. She presents her business plan. Look, El Dorado means donuts. I can make the best donuts. If you lend me the money, I'll make a fortune and pay you back with interest.
Mr. Greedy listens. He crunches the numbers. He likes the plan. He thinks it's a solid bet. He decides to loan her $1 million.
Now, this is the moment. This is the exact point where I think most people's understanding of economics breaks down.
It is. Because we have a very physical idea of money. We imagine that for Mr. Greedy to give Jane $1 million, he has to walk back to the vault, open a heavy steel door, count out that $1 million in gold that A.A. Stone deposited earlier, put it in a wheelbarrow, and hand it to her.
Right. A transfer of physical stuff. I give you the apple, I no longer have the apple. That's how we think the world works.
But that is not what happens. That vault door, it stays shut. Mr. Greedy doesn't touch A.A. Stone's cash, not a single coin. Instead, he reaches for a pen. Or, in modern times, he taps on a keyboard, and he simply writes a number in Jane's new bank account, plus $1 million.
He just wrote it down.
Wait, hold on. Stop there for a second. He just wrote it down.
Yes.
But where did that money come from? It wasn't in the vault. It wasn't taken from Stone's account. Stone still thinks he has his million.
It came from nowhere. It's a promise. At the moment his pen touched the paper, that $1 million was summoned into existence.
That sounds illegal. That sounds like counterfeiting. If I did that in my basement, if I just wrote $1,000,000 on a napkin and tried to buy a car, the FBI would be kicking down my door.
If you did it, yes, it's fraud. When a chartered bank does it, it's the economy. And this is the crucial distinction the source makes. Mr. Greedy isn't pretending to give her Stone's money. He is creating a promise. He is betting that Jane's future bakery will be so successful that she can pay back this imaginary money with real value later.
So he's pulling value from the future and injecting it into the present. Is that what's happening?
That is a beautiful way to put it, yes. He is capitalizing on the future. And so Jane takes this future money, which, looks exactly like regular money in her account, and she hires A.A. Stone, the contractor, to build bakery, the price tag, exactly $1 million. She writes him a check.
Okay, so Stone takes the check, he walks back to the same bank, he deposits it.
Now look at the scoreboard. How much money does Stone have in his account now?
Well, he had his original $1 million, and he just deposited Jane's check for another $1 million. So Stone has $2 million in his account.
But wait a minute. How much actual cash, how many gold coins are in the bank's vault?
Still just the original $1 million that Stone deposited at the very beginning.
Exactly. Stone has $2 million in his account, but there are only $1 million in the vault. We have magically doubled the money supply.
This is where my brain starts to itch. Because Stone thinks he has $2 million. He can see it on his bank statement. He can go spend it. But the physical money hasn't doubled. And the story gets even better or worse, depending on how you look at it.
Right, because construction projects never go as planned, do they? 2 months later, Stone tells Jane there are cost overruns. The ovens are more expensive. The price of wood went up. He needs another $1 million.
Classic contractor move. Of course he does.
So Jane goes back to Mr. Greedy. She convinces him the bakery will be a huge success, even bigger than before. He lends her another $1 million. Again, just typing numbers into an account. She transfers that to Stone.
So now, Stone has $3 million in his account.
Correct.
But the bank still only has that one single original $1 million in the vault.
Exactly. And legally, under current banking laws in many places, they can do this about 7 to 10 times. They can turn that $1 million of base money into $10 million of account money, which means that 90% of the money in our bank accounts today doesn't exist as coins or notes.
Wait, so if that cycle repeats, you're telling me that 90% of the money in the world right now, the money paying for this podcast, the money in our listeners' bank accounts,
is just a digital promise? It's a fiction? It's an entry in a ledger? If everyone listening ran to the bank right now to pull out their cash,
the bank collapses.
instantly. It's called a bank run. The machine beeps and says insufficient funds because the money was never really there in the first place.
So this brings us to the expert's insight from the text. Is this a fraud? Is this a Ponzi scheme? Because it sounds terrifyingly like one.
It feels like one, doesn't it? But the source argues that it's not a fraud. It's a tribute to human imagination. The gap between the 1 million in the vault and the 10 million in the accounts is filled by one thing and one thing only: trust.
Trust in what, specifically?
Trust in the future. That's the key. Mr. Greedy trusts that Jane's bakery will be profitable in the future. A.A. Stone trusts that the bank will remain solvent in the future. We are building the present at the expense of the future, betting that the future will be richer than the present.
This is the magic circle mentioned in the text, isn't it?
Yes. In the modern economy, trust in the future leads to credit. Credit leads to real growth. The bakery gets built, cakes get sold, people get jobs. That growth creates profit, which validates the trust, creating more trust. It's a virtuous cycle.
Which begs the question, why didn't they do this in ancient times? I mean, the Romans were smart. They built aqueducts, they had complex legal systems. The Chinese empires were incredibly advanced. Why didn't they have this credit explosion? Why didn't a Roman banker just write numbers on a scroll?
This is what the text calls the entrepreneur's dilemma. It wasn't that they didn't understand the concept of a loan. They had loans, for sure. It's that they didn't believe in progress.
They didn't believe in progress. That sounds strange.
Not in the economic sense. The pre-modern mindset was largely circular or stagnant. They believed the past was a golden age, the time of the heroes, the gods, the ancestors. They believed the future would probably be worse or, at best, exactly the same. The world doesn't get better, it just repeats.
So let's role play this. If I'm a wealthy merchant in ancient Rome, and you come to me with a startup idea, you say, I want to build a new type of bakery that makes these sweet fried dough things.
Right.
A donut shop.
And I, the Roman merchant, would say, look, there are only so many people in Rome. There's only so much flour, so much honey. If you make money, it means you are taking customers away from the baker down the street. You aren't creating wealth. You are just moving it around.
Ah, the zero-sum game.
Exactly. They believed the total amount of wealth in the world was fixed. The pie never grows. If you get a bigger slice, someone else gets a smaller slice. If you get rich, you must have stolen from someone else. It's the only way.
That explains the biblical quote mentioned in the source. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God.
Precisely. In a zero-sum world, being rich is morally suspect. If the pie is fixed and you have a huge slice, you are, by definition, starving your neighbor. So in the pre-modern economy, no trust in the future meant no credit. No credit meant no new businesses. No new businesses meant no growth. And no growth confirmed the belief that the future wouldn't be better. It was a trap.
It was a self-fulfilling prophecy of stagnation, a feedback loop of pessimism. So how did we break out of the trap? That brings us to section 2, the scientific revolution and the growing pie.
This is where history shifts gears. The scientific revolution wasn't just about astronomy and physics. It changed the psychological landscape. It was built on a very humble, very radical idea, the admission of ignorance, the idea that we don't know everything yet, and if we research, we can learn new things.
Yeah, and that translated to economics. If we can discover new lands, invent new machines, find new energy sources, then the pie isn't fixed.
Right. We can bake more pies, you can have a bakery specializing in chocolate cakes, and you don't have to put the bread bakery next door out of business. People might just eat more cake and bread. The global pie gets bigger for everyone.
This brings us to 1776, the year of American independence, sure, but also the year Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. The source calls this one of the most revolutionary ideas in human history.
It is, because Adam Smith made a truly radical argument that completely overturned that old Roman mindset. He said that when a landlord or a weaver or a factory owner makes a profit, what do they do with it?
Well, the old stereotype was that they hoard it, they put it in a chest under the bed, they act like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold.
Right. But Smith argued that a smart business person doesn't act like a dragon. That's just wealth, not capital. He uses the surplus to hire more assistants to make even more profit. He buys more tools, more machines. So by being greedy, by wanting more profit for yourself, you are actually employing more people and enriching society as a whole.
Greed is good, the Gordon Gekko line.
Before Gordon Gekko said it, Adam Smith implied it, but in a moral sense. Egoism is altruism. By becoming richer, you benefit everyone because you are expanding the pie.
And this completely changed the moral standing of the rich, didn't it?
Completely. Suddenly, being rich wasn't a sin. It was a virtue. If you are rich and you reinvest your money, you are a saint of the new religion of capitalism. You are helping humanity grow and prosper.
You mentioned reinvestment. I think we need to double-click on that because the text makes a really important distinction between capital and wealth. I always thought they were synonyms. If I'm wealthy, I have capital. If I have capital, I'm wealthy.
They aren't synonyms, and understanding the difference is crucial to understanding capitalism as a system. Wealth is just stuff. It's having a lot of money or gold or land that's just sitting there being idle. Capital is money, goods, and resources that are invested in production.
So let's use the examples from the text because they make it really clear. The Pharaoh of Egypt.
The pharaoh was incredibly wealthy. He had gold mines, he had thousands of subjects. He takes all those resources and builds a pyramid. It's magnificent. It's huge. It's a wonder of the world. But is it capital?
No, it's a tomb. It just sits there. It doesn't produce anything. You can't sell tickets to it in 2000 BC. It's a sunk cost. It's just wealth being displayed.
Exactly. It doesn't generate future value. So the pharaoh is wealthy, but he is not a capitalist. Contrast that with a factory hand today. Maybe he doesn't make much money. He's not wealthy in the traditional sense. But he takes a portion of his paycheck and puts it into the stock market.
He is a capitalist.
Yes, because that money is being funneled back into production. It's helping a company build a new factory or invent a new drug or design a better phone. The supreme commandment of the capitalist creed is the profits of production must be reinvested to increase production.
I love the visual comparison the source draws here between the elites. The medieval noble versus the modern CEO.
It's a great image, isn't it? Think of a duke in the Middle Ages. How did he show power? Conspicuous consumption, colorful robes, gold chains, silk, throwing giant banquets, building cathedrals. The point was to show you had so much money you could just waste it.
And the modern CEO.
Drab suit, probably gray or black, looking like a crow, running from meeting to meeting. Even if they have a private jet, the vast majority of their money isn't spent on banquets. It's reinvested in the company or the market. They are servants of the capital. They don't own the capital. The capital owns them. Their job is to make it grow.
It's an endless cycle. Profit, reinvest, production, more profit. But for this cycle to work, you need new technologies. You need the promise that there is something to invest in.
And that leads us to Section 3. The symbiosis of science and capital.
Right. Science needs money to build labs and telescopes and particle accelerators. Capital needs science to invent the steam engine or the internet so the economy can keep growing and that credit bubble doesn't burst.
It's a feedback loop, and nowhere is this clearer than in the history of imperialism. The source argues that European imperialism was essentially a business venture.
This is a fascinating comparison. The difference between Asian empires like the Chinese or Ottoman and the European empires.
The Asian empires were run by kings and generals who generally despised merchants. They saw them as a necessary evil, maybe? They funded their wars through taxes and plunder. If they needed money, they just took it from the peasants or conquered a neighboring province.
Which doesn't exactly encourage people to start businesses or, more importantly, lend money to the government.
No. But Europe was different. Europe was relatively poor compared to China or India. They didn't have the massive tax base. So the kings had to borrow. They relied on credit. This meant the merchants and bankers held the leash. The people with the money had the power.
Let's look at the Columbus case study, because we usually learn about Columbus as this brave explorer, but the source frames him as an entrepreneur pitching a startup to venture capitalists.
That's exactly what he was. He had a high-risk, high-reward business plan. Sail west to find a faster trade route to Asia. He went to the King of Portugal, the biggest VC in the game at the time.
And the pitch probably went something like, give me 3 ships and I'll bring you back mountains of spice and gold. It's a classic startup pitch.
And the King of Portugal's advisors, his due diligence team, they ran the numbers and said, his math is wrong, the ocean is too big, the risk is too high, he'll die.
Rejection. So he pitched it to Italy. Rejection. France. Rejection. Portugal again. Rejection. He was getting desperate.
Finally, he goes to Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Now, they weren't the market leaders. They were the scrappy upstarts. They had just finished a long war. They were tight on cash, but they were desperate for a win. They were the investors willing to take a flyer on a crazy idea. They signed the check.
And Isabella hit the jackpot.
The biggest jackpot in history. They discovered a continent full of gold, silver, and resources nobody in Europe knew existed. And this success did something crucial for the economy. It built trust. Suddenly, bankers were willing to lend to other explorers because, hey, maybe this guy is the next Columbus. It proved the model.
But not everyone was good at this credit game. We have to talk about the Dutch versus the Spanish. This is the tale of two financial systems, and it's incredible.
This is my favorite story in the text because it explains how a tiny, swampy nation like the Netherlands defeated the massive Spanish Empire.
So, set the scene for us.
It's the late 1500s, early 1600s. The Netherlands is a rebellious province of the Spanish Empire. Spain is huge, rich with American gold, and has the best army in Europe. The Dutch have wind, water, and herrings. That's about it.
But the Dutch had a secret weapon: trust and a better legal system.
To understand why the Netherlands won, you have to understand the psychology of the Spanish court. The source tells this great story. Imagine you are a German financier's son with 10,000 gold coins to lend. You walk into the royal palace in Madrid. It's dripping with gold from the Americas. It's intimidating. You lend the king your coins because, well, he's the king.
It feels like the safest bet in the world. He owns a continent. How could he possibly default?
Exactly. But then the loan comes due, and the king doesn't pay. Maybe he spent it on a war in France, maybe on a new cathedral. So you, the financier, you try to sue him. You hire a Spanish lawyer.
I can see where this is going. This is not going to end it well.
You stand up in a Spanish court and say, "His Majesty owes me money." The judge looks at you. The judge who is appointed by the king. The judge who can be fired by the king. And the judge says, "Sir, the king is God's anointed representative on earth. Are you suggesting God owes you money?"
Case dismissed. You lose your money.
Or worse. The king looks at you and says, "You know what? I need another loan, a bigger one. And if you don't give it to me, I might just toss you in a dungeon for being a nuisance."
So it's a shakedown. It's not a financial system. It's a mafia protection racket.
Precisely. Now cut to Amsterdam. It's rainy, it's gray, it smells like fish. It's a republic run by merchants. There is no king. You lend money to a merchant there, and he defaults. You go to the Dutch court,
Which is run by?
other merchants, and this is the key. The Dutch realized that their entire survival depended on their reputation. If they got a reputation for ripping people off, no one would lend them money to fund their rebellion against the Spanish. So the Dutch judges were ruthless about enforcing contracts. Even if you were a powerful town councilor, if you signed a contract, you paid.
So the German financier looks at Madrid, glamorous but dangerous. And he looks at Amsterdam, drab but honest.
And he sends his gold to Amsterdam every single time. This created a massive feedback loop. The Dutch could borrow money at, say, 3% interest. The Spanish had to pay 10, 15, sometimes 20% because of the risk premium.
That's a death spiral for the Spanish. They're paying 5 times more for the same army.
It is. The Dutch could fund an army and a navy for a fraction of the cost. They literally outspent the Spanish Empire into submission, not because they had more gold, but because they had more trust.
Money wins wars.
Credit wins wars.
And this leads to the next evolution of capitalism, right?
Right.
It wasn't just individuals lending money anymore. We see the rise of the joint stock company.
This is section 4. We're talking about privatizing imperialism.
Right. Sailing to India or the Americas was incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Shipwrecks, pirates, disease. If you are one investor owning one ship and it sinks, you're destitute. You're living on the street.
So the Europeans invented the limited liability joint stock company. Instead of one person owning one ship, you buy a small share in a company that owns 50 ships. If one ship sinks, you lose a little profit, but you aren't ruined. It spreads the risk.
This unleashed a flood of investment. And the most famous example is the VOC, the Dutch East India Company.
The VOC is fascinating. We think of companies today like Google or Apple as powerful. But the VOC was on another level entirely. They weren't just a business. They were a state within a state.
They had their own private army.
They had cannons. They hired mercenaries. They built forts. They could declare war, sign treaties, execute people.
They conquered Indonesia.
Literally. The conquest of Indonesia wasn't a project of the Dutch government initially. It was a project of the VOC. They ruled Indonesia for almost 200 years as a private, for-profit colony. Imagine if Amazon had its own navy and conquered a country to secure cheap shipping. That is the scale we are talking about.
There was the WIC, the Dutch West Indies Company. They operated in the Atlantic, and they established a settlement called New Amsterdam.
On the tip of Manhattan Island, yes.
And because they were worried about attacks from natives and the British, they built a wall to defend the colony.
And today, the pavement over that old wall is the financial center of the world, Wall Street.
That is such a cool connection. But joint stock companies have dark side too, don't they? They thrive on hype. And hype can lead to bubbles.
The Mississippi Bubble of 1717. This is a cautionary tale that sounds eerily modern.
So we're in France now. the Mississippi Company.
It was led by a man named John Law. This company was chartered to colonize the lower Mississippi Valley, which is basically New Orleans. Now, at the time, if you went there, it was a mosquito-infested swamp with alligators.
Not exactly a vacation spot.
Yeah.
Or a place you'd expect to find gold.
No. But John Law, who was a genius marketing man and also happened to be the head of the French Central Bank, talk about a conflict of interest, he spread rumors that it was paved with gold. He sold the vision, the hype.
The hype machine.
Stock prices skyrocketed. People in Paris went absolutely insane. They sold their homes, their jewelry, their livestock to buy shares. Servants became millionaires overnight. The streets outside John Law's office were so crowded with buyers that people were literally crushed to death in the mob.
And then reality hit, as it always does.
Some people actually went to Mississippi. They saw the swamp. They saw the alligators. No gold. They wrote letters back home. Word got out.
And the panic set in.
Everyone tried to sell it once. The price crashed to zero. John Law tried to save it by printing money from the central bank to buy shares, which is insider trading and market manipulation on a massive scale.
And the whole system just collapsed.
It destroyed the French financial system for a generation. The French crown was humiliated and bankrupt. This loss of trust and financial ruin was a direct precursor to the French Revolution. The king couldn't get credit anymore, so he had to raise taxes, and people said, no more.
It's amazing how financial history drives political history. We think of the French Revolution as being about liberty, equality, fraternity. But it started because the king's credit card was declined.
Exactly. The bills came due.
Speaking of inseparable, let's move to Section 5. When capital wields the sword. We talked about private armies, but eventually the governments themselves became the enforcers for the capitalists.
Marx called Western governments the capitalist trade union. They began fighting wars specifically to protect private profits.
And the most egregious example in the text has to be the Opium War.
It's hard to believe this actually happened, but it did. In the 1840s, British merchants were making a fortune selling opium to China. It was a drug cartel, plain and simple. Millions of Chinese were addicted. It was destroying the country.
So the Chinese government said, enough. They banned opium, they confiscated the drugs and destroyed them, which seems like a pretty reasonable thing for a sovereign nation to do.
You'd think so. But the British merchants complained to London. And they didn't say, we want to sell drugs. They said, our property rights are being violated. China is impeding free trade.
They framed drug running as free trade. That takes some nerve.
And the British government agreed. They declared war. Britain used its navy, funded by that trust and credit we talked about, to crush the Chinese defenses. They forced China to accept the opium trade. And as a prize, they took control of a little island called Hong Kong to use as a base for their drug running.
That puts the history of Hong Kong in a very different light. It wasn't a noble colony. It was a narco-state outpost.
Indeed, it was a war fought for the balance sheet of drug dealers, a truly shocking moment in history.
There's another example in the text that blew my mind. The Greek rebellion. This is about bonds.
Yes. In 1821, Greece was rebelling against the Ottoman Empire. Now, usually you think countries fight wars because of ideals or territory. But here, the London Stock Exchange played the role of a general.
Financiers in London issued Greek rebellion bonds.
Basically, you could buy a share of the rebellion. If Greece won independence, they would pay you back with interest. If they lost, the bond was worthless paper. It was a speculative investment in a revolution.
Betting on the underdog.
But the rebels were losing badly. The Ottomans were crushing them. So the bondholders in London started to panic. We're going to lose our investment. And who listens when bondholders panic?
The British government.
The British Navy, along with the French and Russians, sailed to Navarino and sank the Ottoman fleet. They didn't do it purely out of love for Greek democracy. They did it because there was too much British capital at risk.
They intervened to save the investment, to make sure the bonds paid out.
And they did. Greece became free. But they started their existence with a massive debt to British bankers. The country was effectively mortgaged from day one.
This ties into the modern concept of credit ratings, doesn't it? The source makes a bold claim. A country's credit rating is more important than its natural resources.
Absolutely. 100%. Look at a country with huge oil reserves, but a despotic government and no rule of law. Their credit rating is junk. They can't borrow money to build infrastructure. They stay poor. The oil stays in the ground.
Contrast that with a country like Israel or Singapore. Very few natural resources, basically rocks and sand.
But they have good laws, stable courts, and high credit ratings. They can borrow cheap money to invest in high-tech industries and education. They become rich. In the modern world, trust is more valuable than oil.
And here comes the heavy part. This system isn't all win-win. It's not all growing pies. We have to look at the dark side. Section 6, the capitalist hell.
We have to, because there is a cult of the free market. The idea that if we just leave the market alone, everything will be fine. Politics shouldn't interfere.
But the text argues, and I think pretty convincingly, that there is no such thing as a truly free market.
No, because trust, the foundation of everything we've talked about, requires police to catch thieves, courts to enforce contracts, and laws to prevent fraud. A market without regulation isn't a market, it's a chaotic brawl.
And the failure of market protections leads to atrocities. The theoretical argument is, greedy bosses must treat workers well, or the workers will leave and go to a competitor.
That's the theory. That's the Adam Smith ideal. But in practice, bosses can form monopolies. They can collude to fix wages. Or, in the worst case, they can strip the workers of their freedom entirely so they can't leave.
We're talking about the Atlantic slave trade. We need to pause here, because when we talk about atrocities in history, we usually think of hatred. We think of Nazis or religious zealots, people who kill because they burn with hate for the other.
Right. It's visceral. It's emotional. You kill because you hate someone's race or religion or identity.
But the text makes a distinction here that I found profoundly disturbing. It argues that the Atlantic slave trade, perhaps the greatest crime in human history, wasn't primarily driven by racial hatred. It was driven by a spreadsheet.
It was the mechanism of the joint stock company at its worst. Think about the physical distance involved. You have a sugar plantation in the Caribbean. The conditions are hellish. The average life expectancy of a slave upon arrival is just a few years. It is a meat grinder for human beings.
But the owner of that plantation isn't swinging the whip.
No, the owner is a grandmother in Liverpool. It's a baker in Amsterdam. It's a group of investors who bought shares in the West India Company because their broker told them it had a consistent 6% annual return.
They aren't seeing the blood, they're seeing a dividend check.
Exactly. This is the concept of cold indifference. The shareholder in Amsterdam doesn't hate the African man dying in the sugarcane field. He doesn't wish him harm. He simply doesn't think about him at all. He thinks about the sugar in his tea and the profit in his account. The human cost is an abstraction.
It's the ultimate sanitization of evil. The market mechanism effectively scrubs the blood off the money before it reaches the investor.
And because the company is structured to maximize profit, and because sugar is a commodity, the invisible hand of the market dictates that you must minimize costs. And if buying a new slave is cheaper than keeping an existing one alive, the market says, buy new ones.
And if a CEO at the time tried to be nice, if he said, I'm going to spend double to treat people well,
then his sugar costs more. Customers buy from the competitor. His profits drop. The shareholders fire him and replace him with someone who will cut costs again. In an unregulated system, the system punishes mercy.
that is a terrifying realization. It means the evil isn't a bug in the system. In an unregulated market, the evil is a feature.
It is the inevitable mathematical result of prioritizing growth above all else, and we see this replay again, tragically, in the Congo.
The Congo. King Leopold II of Belgium. And this wasn't the 1700s. This was the late 19th century. We had cameras, we had newspapers, and yet,
Leopold ran the Congo Free State not as a colony of Belgium, but as his own private corporate holding. He set up a humanitarian organization to develop the Congo. It was a front. It was a business enterprise.
And the product was rubber.
The Industrial Revolution needed rubber for tires, hoses, belts. The Congo had rubber trees. Leopold turned the entire country into a forced labor camp to extract it.
And again, the market doesn't care how you get the rubber, it just cares about the price.
So Leopold's agents set quotas for each village. And if a village didn't meet the quota, the logic of the market demanded punishment. We aren't just talking about beatings. We are talking about baskets of severed hands presented to officers to prove that productivity enforcement was happening.
6 to 10 million people.
6 to 10 million. Sacrificed on the altar of the rubber market, that is 20% of the population of the Congo at the time.
It forces us to confront the fact that the free market has no internal conscience. It has no morality.
It doesn't. It is a tool. It maximizes growth. If growth requires slavery, the market will do it unless a government, a moral force from outside the system, steps in and says no.
So we've seen the magic, the growth, the wars, and the horrors. Where does that leave us? Section 7? Conclusion and future outlook.
It leaves us with a very complicated legacy. We call it the great inequality.
The pie is definitely bigger. That's undeniable. 60 trillion versus 250 billion.
Yes. But an Indonesian laborer today might actually have less food security and less freedom than his ancestor 500 years ago, even though the global economy is massive. The distribution of the bigger pie is the problem.
So what is the capitalist defense? Why do we keep this system?
Two main arguments. First, we can't live without it. The only serious alternative we tried in the 20th century, communism, was, by most accounts, worse. It produced famine and tyranny without the efficiency.
And the second argument?
Patience. The capitalist promise is that paradise is always just around the corner. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, there is poverty and inequality. But if we just let the pie grow a little bigger, some of it will trickle down to everyone.
And to be fair, the source does point out there are positive indicators.
There are. Life expectancy is up globally. Child mortality is way down. Calorie intake is up. We are, on average, better off than in 1914. The system produces stuff effectively, no question.
But there's a cliffhanger, a huge one.
The environmental cliffhanger. Capitalism assumes infinite growth.
If the economy acts like a hormone-soused teenager, eventually that teenager eats all the food in the fridge.
Exactly. Infinite growth requires infinite resources. But we live on a finite planet. Can we keep growing forever without exhausting our raw materials and collapsing the ecosystem? That is the $60 trillion question.
So let's wrap this up with some key takeaways. What are the nuggets our listeners should put in their pocket after this whole journey?
I think number one, the shift from zero-sum to win-win. The idea that I can get rich without you getting poor is the foundational belief of the modern world.
Money is trust. The money in your bank account is 90% imagination and trust in the future.
Capitalism is an ethic of reinvestment. It's not about buying gold robes. It's about building new factories.
And fourth, the big one.
The free market has no soul. It requires regulation to prevent it from consuming people for profit. It's an incredibly powerful engine, but you can't take your hands off the steering wheel.
I want to leave the listeners with a final provocative thought. We talked about how this entire system, $60 trillion of it, is built on the credit of a better future. We trust that next year will be richer than this year.
Yes. The core belief.
What happens psychologically to a society if it stops believing that? If a generation starts to believe that their children will be poorer than them, does the trust evaporate? And if the trust goes, where does the money go?
That is a terrifying thought. If the narrative of progress breaks, the bubble bursts, and the vault is empty.
Something to chew on while you check your bank balance. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. See you next time.